You know, before Frictional games would go on to make genre-defining horror classics such as Amnesia, The Dark Descent, and Soma, they made a trilogy of horror games called Penumbra. Well, the games were initially intended to be a trilogy, but then the second game came out and Frictional said it was the end of the story, only to add a third chapter through a DLC later on that's also kind of its own game, making it into a trilogy again. Yeah, I think it's safe to say Frictional games were quite a young studio back when they made the Penumbra games, and quite clearly lacked focus when making these. This is especially evident with how differently each of these games play from one another, with the first game being more of a survival horror with a focus on stealth and melee combat, the second being more of your generic horror puzzle game with no combat at all, and the third being exclusively a puzzle game without even having enemies to avoid. Oh, and by the way, if you can't tell from my voice, I'm still sick. It's been a miserable few days. With all that being said, why don't we jump straight into the Overture. Oh my god, I can't fucking talk. I'm sick like this. With all that being said, why don't we jump straight into it with the first game, Penumbra Overture. Set in 2001, we follow a physicist named Philip whose mother has recently passed away. After receiving a letter from his supposed dead father, Philip finds himself in a location in uninhabited Greenland. With a blizzard forcing Philip to take shelter in an abandoned mine, the entrance collapses behind him and he is forced to go deeper to find a way to escape. Within this mine, Philip discovers letters from a stranded scientist who has resorted to eating the cave spiders to stay alive. The scientist seems to discover that the cave spiders have a psychoactive toxin in them that he believes is beginning to have an effect on him. Philip also starts to receive messages over the radio from a man named Red, who has clearly gone batshit insane. Red promises Philip that if he is found, he will give Philip answers to what happened here. During Philip's further descent into the mines, he discovers that there are more than just giant cave spiders to worry about here, such as zombie dogs and gargantuan earthworms. Philip also discovers through more of the various letters scattered around the joint that there is also some sort of secret society called the Archaic studying the unusual phenomena surrounding the mine. Philip does eventually make his way down to where Red is trapped, only to find him inside an incinerator begging for death. Me too, buddy. Me too. With no other option, Philip incinerates him, and within Red's ashes there is a key needed to progress to the next area known as the shelter. Once inside the shelter, Philip notices a human-like figure watching him. Whilst trying to approach this figure, Philip is knocked unconscious and then the game ends. Yay. Now, to be honest, I wasn't super interested in this game's story, at all, and only really felt like it was starting to get decent right at the end. I really did feel like I was only reaching about, the middle of the game's plot, then it suddenly ended and the credits started to roll. It's quite clear to me that Frictional games focus more on gameplay than storytelling here. With that being said, let's talk about the gameplay. As mentioned earlier, this game is more of a survival horror game with melee combat and the option to stealth around enemies. The game tries to incentivize you to use stealth over actually fighting, mainly because the melee combat genuinely sucks. To fight in this game, you have to hold left click whilst holding a weapon out, then pull back your mouse and swing it forward to actually attack. It sounds interesting on paper, but in practice it sucks, with a lot of the time if you move your mouse too quickly it won't pick up your inputs. Thankfully, the enemy AI in this game is pretty stupid, and every time you land a hit on an enemy, they stay knocked down for a very generous amount of time. This knockdown time makes the janky combat a lot more manageable, and although the game clearly wanted me to be stealthing around these enemies, I found myself standing on a box flinging my mouse across my desk most of the time. The only exception to this was when I came across a horde of spiders, as there are way too enemies to handle with this shitty ass combat, and the giant earthworm, as they are more of a set piece you're supposed to run away from. Outside of that, the zombie dogs and spiders that aren't in a horde are fair game as long as you're careful and use their shitty AI to your advantage. As mentioned earlier, the game does have stealth mechanics, but when in stealth there is also a panic attack mechanic where if you stare at an enemy for too long, your character will alert them to your presence. Because I'm not a fan of staring at a wall so I don't have a panic attack, I obviously chose to start cracking skulls. The game also seems to imply that engaging in a life or death fight with these enemies is far less scary than cowering in a corner where they can't see you, as there is no panic attack system when in combat. Where the gameplay really does shine, however, is in the game's puzzles. I really felt like each puzzle was unique with its own mechanics to them, and almost every puzzle utilised the game's quite impressive physics system, or at the very least felt like a very well designed Resident Evil-esque puzzle, requiring a lot of backtracking and using key items to complete them. You know, thank fuck I decided to review the whole trilogy in this video, or I would be ending my video right now. There really isn't that much to say about Overture. I definitely do think it's worth a playthrough. It's just unfortunately very short, clocking in at around 5 hours to beat. Overture's sequel, titled Penumbra Black Plague, would release almost an entire year after the first game. Black Plague's story begins right where we left off with Overture, with Philip waking up after being knocked unconscious in a locked room. After escaping the room, Philip discovers that the base he entered at the end of the first game is in complete shambles, with all of its personnel being infected by a zombie-like virus called the Turngate. As the story progresses, you find out that the Turngate is actually some sort of primordial being that links everything it infects to a singular hive mind. Philip also finds out that he is infected, but instead of slowly being taken over by the hive mind, he is being taken over by a guy called Clarence. Clarence has a bit of a sick sense of humour and quite frequently taunts Philip and causes him to hallucinate. Philip is also contacted by a doctor called Annabelle Swanson, who has managed to survive by locking herself in her lab. Philip also manages to find his father and learns that his father actually communicated with the Turngate but committed suicide after what he had learned. Philip eventually makes his way to Annabelle's lab, but Clarence makes him hallucinate her as one of the infected and tricks Philip into killing her. Philip is able to make an antidote using notes in Annabelle's lab and rids himself of Clarence. However, Clarence's consciousness is transferred into a nearby infected corpse and tries to attack Philip. Philip is saved by the Turngate, as the Turngate sees Clarence as a threat because he is not controlled by the hive mind. The Turngate then communicates directly with Philip and puts him through a series of tests to see if he can cooperate, show mercy, and demonstrate self-sacrifice. After these tests, the Turngate reveals it came to Earth millions of years ago and once coexisted with the Inuit people, and even gave them ancient knowledge. However, when humanity began to expand across the globe, it hid itself away for protection, but then the Archaic came along and tried to exploit it for their own personal gain. The Turngate basically says that humans are a destructive species and criticizes us for warring with each other, yada yada yada. You've probably heard this plot point a million times before. Humans bad because we're monkeys that throw nuclear bombs at each other. The Turngate then asks Philip to send a message to someone above ground asking them to destroy the Archaic's research facility. Why the Turngate can't just get Philip to destroy it, seeing as he's already there? I don't know. The game ends with you sending a message to a friend of yours on the outside letting them know where the facility is. Whilst I will say I do think that overall this story is better than the previous game, the ending fucking sucks and makes absolutely zero sense to me. So, the Turngate wants someone from the outside to destroy the research facility, but doesn't want that person to go to the research facility to do that. Unless Philip's friend has access to missiles or nukes, how is he expected to destroy the facility without going there? Unless he knows someone in the government or goes to them with this crazy story. Like, just imagine it. Hey, Mr. President, my friend Philip sent me this email saying there's a zombie virus controlled by a primordial being in Greenland and we need to destroy it. Oh my god, I 100% believe you and I'm sending all my nukes to Greenland right now. Hopefully Greenland doesn't see this as an act of war, as the Turngate specifically said it doesn't like us warring with each other. Like, you get what I'm saying, right? It's stupid. The story would have been far better off if it made Philip overload a nuclear reactor and blow up the base or something. It's a pretty reused plot point in stories like these, but it would have been a lot more satisfying and make a lot more sense in any other game by sending a fucking email. Also, this isn't even like written down on my script or notes or something, I just thought of it now. Did Philip's dad kill himself because the Turngate said that we war with each other and that's bad? Like, Philip's dad is supposedly like a smart scientist or something working for this secret society. He's only just figured out we have wars with each other and he's killed himself over it. What a fucking pussy and what a fucking idiot. It just makes Philip's dad seem like a fucking idiot. Thankfully, much like Overture, the gameplay does a lot of the heavy lifting. Unlike Overture, however, there is no form of combat. Instead, the game relies entirely on stealth and avoiding enemies. There is only one type of enemy in Black Plague, that being the infected. These guys are very creepy and quite often be walking around holding flashlights, making taking cover more of a necessity than in the first game. However, if you are seen by one of them, it's not going to matter too much as they are quite easy to avoid. You run twice as fast as them, meaning if you are caught, you can quite easily outrun them and hide to regain health, and their AI isn't much better than the enemies in Overture. Black Plague also frequently has puzzles for you to complete, and much like Overture, these puzzles are very fun and very well designed. Other than the disappointing ending, I think that Black Plague is a better game. The enemy AI, while still being pretty dumb, is far less exploitable than in the first game, and the removal of melee combat makes them a lot more threatening. At least until you figure out that you can pretty much outrun everything in the game. And now for our final game, or I suppose technically DLC, Penumbra Requiem. Now, I'm gonna be honest here, I didn't finish this game. This game is probably the biggest departure from the other two, as it is purely a puzzle game. I mean, there's not even enemies to sneak past in this one, it's just puzzles. Now you might be thinking, but Yowie, you've been gushing grannies this whole time about the game's puzzles. Shouldn't this mean it's still a really good game? Yeah, well, the puzzles in this game are entirely different than the puzzles in the other games. The other games felt more like they had a Resident Evil inspiration to them, whereas the ones in Requiem have more of a Portal inspiration to them. Now don't get me wrong, I have nothing against Portal, I absolutely love those games, but Penumbra Requiem feels like we have Portal at home, you know? I did a bit of research and found out that Portal 1 released less than a year before this game did, and I really feel like they saw Portal's popularity and that this game already had a very similar physics engine and just decided to jump on the bandwagon. The issue is if you fuck up a puzzle in Portal, it's easy to reset that puzzle and try again, whereas in Penumbra, there's no easy way to reset a puzzle, so if you fuck it up, you better hope your last checkpoint was in a good spot, or you have to go searching through your game's save files to look for one. After about an hour of this bootleg Portal experience, I just got so sick of it, man. They had interesting puzzles in the first two games that utilized the physics engine, as well as the more Resident Evil style figure out which item goes with what object type of puzzles, and they were really good puzzles. This game should have been more of that. To give my final thoughts on the Penumbra games, the first two genuinely surprised me. I mean, they can be a bit goofy at times, and I don't really like the story, but the puzzles were fun and the spooky atmosphere can run chills down your spine. Overture and Black Plague I can definitely say are 100% worth at least one playthrough if you've never played them before. Penumbra Requiem, however, leaves a lot to be desired. I definitely don't think it's as good as the first two games, and in my opinion is a bit of a waste of time. If you want to play a physics-based puzzle game, just go play Portal. This game is clearly trying to copy what Portal did anyway, but just isn't as good. I also feel like this entire trilogy could have just been one single game and be better off for it. When the first game ends, it feels like it's the beginning of Act 2 to a story and not the end of the game. Which I guess it kind of is because these games were always intended to be a trilogy, but here it just feels weird to be in the middle of a story and credits just start rolling. I really feel like it would have been better if these were all one game where Overture is Act 1, Black Plague is Act 2, and we just completely cut out Requiem and replace it with a third act where Philip himself destroys the base instead of sending off a fucking email as the end of the game. Anyway, that's it for today's video. If you liked it, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye.